Any declarations of interest? Councillor Silwood.
First interest on, I think it's item 9.
Thank you. And any others? No? Item 2 is the confirmation of the minutes of the 23rd of May. Are we happy with those? Moved by Councillor Little, seconded by Councillor Trelfall. Are you all in favour? Thank you. I'll sign those. Thank you. And item 3, are there any urgent items?
There's no urgent items tonight, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4 is Policy Development Scrutiny Committee recommendations. And Councillor Wilson, good evening.
Good evening. Please forgive me. I woke up with one of those wonderful, wonderful summer colds. And so I apologize if I sound really kind of bad.
Okay, though.
I am going to just, at this time, I'm going to just ask that you do consider and note the recommendations of the Scrutiny Committee. I will mention in passing that when we looked at the year-end performance exemption report, that we did request a member learning hour on freedom of information because there seemed to be quite a few questions about freedom of information. As for the second item we looked at, it was an exempt item. So what I would like to do, if it meets with your approval, Mr. Chairman, is that when we get to that item at the end of the meeting, I will come back to the table to discuss the scrutiny recommendations at that time.
That's fine. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Okay. And thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. Have we got a proposal for those?
Do you want to propose the first as recommendations?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. That leads us now to item 5. Which is the Community Focus Scrutiny Committee. And Councillor Mulholland, good evening.
Good evening, Councillor Reeves, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, there are 4 items on the agenda. The first, a simple report from the Citizens Advice Bureau, which was accepted by the committee, and you see the recommendations there.
Yes.
I'd just like to add to that part of the purpose of this is to make sure that things are ticking over and that we're getting what we would consider value for money. And I think the committee genuinely felt that we were getting good value for money. And they have just come to the end of coming to the end of the 3-year agreement, and it was the committee felt that we should suggest to them that they need to start negotiating with us for a further agreement. But you've got recommendations in front of you. The second item was Witchwood and Linnet Lanewood, which has been a little bit complicated. We thought it was inappropriate to try and deal with it on the night. You'll be thankful to hear that the idea of the task finish group would hopefully be 2 meetings. I think we do feel that we can actually possibly help in some way, but it's not going to be drawn out. So that's on the table of the task finish group. The third item was the management of the windblown stand, which was far more complicated. I'm not going to go through it. You've got the recommendations there. Annie Ansell has done quite a bit of work on it, and we actually got quite a nice smile of a few members of the public that I wasn't expecting a smile from, so I think they must have been doing something right there. And I do think the recommendation is a good example of how we might want to work together with all parties. If anybody's got any questions, obviously I'm happy to answer them. The last item was the Fairhaven and Promenade Gardens Master Plan. You'll notice it's now down as Fairhaven and Promenade Gardens Master Plan, as opposed to Fairhaven Lake Master Plan. That is as it says in the recommendation. Item 2 is to endorse that the whole approach become a more strategic approach for that coastal strip.
Thank you.
And other than that, you've got the recommendations there.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Councillor Bush?
May I just ask a few questions, mainly financial ones?
As long as they're not too difficult.
No. Regarding the Citizens Advice Bureau, we've supported them for many years, and we're proud to do that. I think they do some great work, and it's really valued. And we would want to continue, I'm sure all councillors would want to continue to support them in the future. From their report, do they have much success? I know they haven't in the past. Do they have much success in attracting any other sources of funding, or do you feel that they are totally reliant on our grants for them?
When we first started down this path, which was with Citizens Advice and Age Concern, of looking into our involvement as a funder, that was one of the areas that I was quite keen to look into. However, at the time, and it's still the case since, we've been repeatedly told that the Citizens Advice, as a national organisation, can only consider core funding from the local authority. So whatever money we give them is for core funding. Nothing else they can attract can be considered as core funding. If they attract anything else at all, it's for one-off schemes, possibly, let's say at the moment, it's likely they'll get some funding for debt counselling, etc. A lot of the schemes where money is available don't really fit in with FILE, because we haven't got the sort of, let's say, the ethnic mix, we haven't got other problems that other areas have got. So they've not been hugely successful, although debt is affecting everybody, so that's one. I think we're making progress on getting funding for that. But in terms of core funding, there seems to be no other source of money that they can consider as core funding, and this seems to be a diktat from the national organisation. It's something that we have challenged, but quite frankly we've got nowhere.
And they've not said they've had funding from the Legal Services Commission, because I know that is available for Citizens Advice Bureau.
Again, not for core funding, for certain specifics, but it would appear that the core funding, which allows them to exist, can only come from us. I mean, I have challenged it, and the committee's challenged it, not just this time, but on previous occasions. But that, we keep coming up against this old chestnut that they cannot use other funding as core funding.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pounder?
Yeah, the same problem as know when I was, it came under my portfolio. And in respect to what Karen said about the legal services, right, they applied for that and we couldn't get it, but they gave it to Cleavers.
Right.
And Cleavers worked in conjunction with us. So we got some benefit from a grant from the legal services. But it wasn't under the control of our own, under FILE CAB. It was under Cleavers who agreed to come out and do 1 day, 2 days a week on legal aspects at FILE.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll wish to propose these items.
Proposed by Councillor Trelfall.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Fazackley. Thank you very much indeed,
Thank you.
Councillor Long.
Thanks very much.
Item 6 is on page 12 and is the medium-term financial strategy. And Mr. O'Donoghue, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. This report sets out the financial outturn position for the Council for 2011-12. The report is in three main sections, dealing individually with revenue, with capital and with treasury management. It's probably beneficial for Cabinet if in presenting the report I can focus on the key numbers under each of those three areas. On page 15 of your agenda papers, Table 2 summarises the revenue outturn position for the Council. There are three columns within that table: the budgeted position, the actual position, and the variance being the difference between the two. If I can focus on the middle column, the actual position, the surplus of resources generated during the year was 1.1 million for the Council, which is a variance of 1.064 million against the budgeted position for the year. Appendix B of the report details all the variances for all the service areas, which total the 1.064 million. From the £1.1 million surplus for the year, the report recommends transfers into specific earmarked reserves as set out in Table 1 at the top of that page. Those reserves are a vehicle maintenance reserve of £100,000, land charges reserve of £55,000, an MMI insurance reserve of £105,000 and an IT reserve of £100,000. Full details of those proposals are set out on page 14. After accounting for those transfers into earmarked reserves, the balance will be transferred into general fund reserves, a balance of 740,000. That will leave an overall position as set out in Table 3 over the page in respect of general fund balances. Again, there's three columns in that table, one showing the budgeted position, one showing the actual. The focus on that central column, that shows the opening balances of reserves for the Council of 2.991 million, transfers into general fund reserves as a result of the outturn of 740,000, leaving a closing balance of 3.731 million. And as detailed in paragraph 4.2, the first call on that 3.731 million of balances is slippage proposed of 168,000, which is set out in appendices C1 and C2 of the report, leaving general fund balances at just over 3.5 million. So that in a nutshell is the revenue outturn position. Moving on to capital, if I can refer to Table 4 on page 17, the latest estimate of capital spend for the year was £3.2 million, and the outturn expenditure was 2.895 million, leaving a variance for the year of 339,000. The lion's share of which relates to slippage items totaling 322,000, which are detailed in Appendix D. In respect of financing that capital expenditure for the year, if we can look at Table 6 on page 19, the expenditure for the year was 2.895 million, and that was financed, or the proposed financing for the year, which Cabinet are asked to approve, is grants and contributions from external sources. They include Lancashire County Council, the LSP, friends groups, lottery, etc. of 1.301 million. Capital receipts from asset disposals of 1.373 million, and revenue contributions of 221,000. So that's how the capital spend for the year is proposed to be financed. It's worth noting that no financial resources have been lost to the Council as a result of the variances on capital expenditure. And then the final section that the report covers is in respect of treasury management activities for the year. The summary position is set out in Table 7. The total borrowing for the Council as at the end of the financial year is £3.8 million. That is against the council's capital financing requirement or underlying need to borrow of £6.5 million. So at the end of the year, the council was effectively under-borrowed. The difference between the two was made up from the cash resources that the council has got. The council still has that underlying need to borrow. So the overall conclusions are set out at the top of page 22. The report in paragraph 13.1, the report represents an improvement in the council's general fund revenue forecast balances position compared with the previous budget forecasts. Members will already be aware of the underlying budget position, which shows from the medium-term financial strategy that the budgeted call on reserves of over £500,000 a year are indicated, and that further budget requirements are likely to be required from 12-13 onwards to balance that over the medium term. And the improved position leaves the council well placed to face uncertainties in the future and ensure that further savings requirements can be planned and phased over a longer period. So the recommendations, Chairman, in the report are to approve the general fund revenue outturn position and the slippage as set out in the appendix, to approve those transfers to the earmarked reserves, to approve the capital outturn and the proposed financing, and to approve the Treasury management report and the prudential indicators set out in the appendices.
Thank you.
Happy, Chairman, to take any questions.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr O'Donoghue. Thank you to you. Thank you to your team, first of all. Thank you to all budget holders for delivering this underspend, considerable as it is. Great to be on the right side of it, not the wrong side of it, but as you know, I do have some concerns about that and I want that addressing. Could I first of all ask you about the earmarked reserves,
yes,
which are on page 15, just to clarify whether we believe that these will be sufficient for the future or not. My understanding is that the land charges reserve of 55,000 and also the MMI reserve of 105,000 is perhaps our best estimate of our total liability should that come to pass, and so therefore those reserves should hopefully not be needed to be topped up in the future. Am I right in that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. The vehicle maintenance reserve of £100,000, again, in best information is, do we expect to have to top that up again in the life of the current vehicles?
No. The reserve before this top-up stands at £27,000. This will take the reserve to £127,000, which is thought to be sufficient to meet any additional maintenance costs going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's the IT reserve that we may need to revisit in the future once we understand what our needs are for IT, perhaps in a new configured building, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Turning to the extent of the underspend then, can I ask you when it became apparent that we were looking at such a large underspend?
The size of the underspend in its entirety only became apparent as we started to close the accounts. As you know, we monitor the budgets quarterly, and the scrutiny committee receive those reports, and yourself as portfolio holder received those reports. They were indicating that there were a number of underspends across the council. There's been a direction from the management team to minimise expenditure and to seek out efficiencies, and that has a downward pressure on expenditure. I think it was flagged up in the MTFS report at Budget Council in March that was the case and was likely to result in an underspend at the end of the year. The size of the underspend only became apparent during the closure of accounts process in April and May that's culminated in this report.
Okay, thank you. And it's right to say, isn't it, that we have taken savings within the year as well? So when it's become apparent, such as I think we've had vacancy savings, yes, in staffing, we've taken those in year, yes, so that we're trying to be on the right side of budget and actual, which is my concern, because the size of this underspend came to light after council set its budget. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's right.
Okay, so leading on from that, and because we are setting our budget on the best information that's available to us, and that means we're making decisions, perhaps quite difficult decisions on the basis of that information, what action can officers take then, moving forward, to address the mismatch between budget and actual spend?
That's something that the management team are very keen to do. I think it is referred to in the report in paragraph 5.2 on page 16. We say in the coming months the outturn variances over the last 3 years will be analysed in detail with adjustments made in the next forecast to establish a new baseline budget position that reflects the changes in service delivery and structure. I think what that's saying is that there have been some significant changes in the organisation, restructures, that have, including a modernisation strategy. A chunk of the savings are from the modernisation strategy that has taken a couple of years to become embedded and to bear some fruit. The management team are committed to carrying out that piece of work to analyse the variances this year compared with previous years and to right-size those budgets accordingly to minimise the size of variances, be they underspends or overspends going forward.
Okay, so in moving the recommendations then, would it be appropriate to add a fifth recommendation that work is done to reprofile the budget heads to more accurately reflect the actual spend in line with the work that you're planning to do? I'd like to add a further recommendation so that that work is carried out.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Yeah.
And when would the next forecast, when do you believe the next forecast would be ready to show those new figures?
Ordinarily, the first forecast annually has gone in October, November, and I think we're on that same time scale again. We're focusing at the moment on closing the accounts, the external auditors come in and auditors on that, so the intention is to then start that work on right-sizing those budgets in preparation for an update in November. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So, Chairman, I'd like to add that fifth recommendation that as is proposed, that the budgets are reprofiled and that a report comes back always within the MTFS, if that's however best to present it, so that we do make sure we have got this piece of work underway.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the MTFS will be the best way to represent that. It can be encapsulated within that next update.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, and I was going just to make the observation on the same lines as Councillor Buckley, that obviously this is the third year that we've had underspend, and we can identify budget heads that will have a similar history and therefore drill down on those in order to reprofile the budget. So I'm quite happy for that recommendation to go in as well. And as Councillor Buckley has proposed the reports, may I thank you and your team for all the hard work that you put forward, and I look forward to seeing the reprofiled budgets, and I'm very pleased to second that. Thank you. Are we all in favour? Thank you. That then takes us on to item 7. Which is the corporate plan. It is on page 34.
Thank you, Chair. This is the Corporate Plan 2012-13 Actions Update, pages 34 to 37 of the agenda. The current corporate plan is a 3-year plan. We have an annual revision of the actions within that plan. On page 37, the table on page 37, the actions are the bottom column. So the key projects during 2012-13 are the things that get revised on an annual basis. We have made some minor changes to the outcomes and the targets which were originally set in 2010 as a result of the National Performance Framework and associated performance indicators being abolished, as well as the change back to producing a local plan as opposed to a core strategy and planning. So those terminologies have been corrected, and some changes made as a result of national regulation changing. There's a review of the targets on an annual basis as well. The full report on the performance of the 3-year plan will be after April 2013, and from this autumn we'll be starting work on the next corporate plan, which will involve a significant amount of member, customer and employee engagement to draft our next 3-year corporate plan. The recommendation is that the Cabinet approves the identified actions for 2012-13 in the current corporate plan and the revisions to targets and outcomes in line with changed priorities and circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Any observations on the corporate plan? Councillor Fiddler.
When it comes to the key objectives, it's the first top one, and we have to achieve a 5-year housing land supply. In the light of the National Planning Framework, that has to be changed to 6 years.
We will do that.
Yeah, I've just been discussing with Councillor Pounder the satisfaction targets on a couple of these, and I wonder if we could perhaps look at them again, not to stop this document going forward, but I think we're aware that in some of the refuse collections and the cleanliness of the borough, our achievements are maybe beyond those satisfaction levels, and it would be good to keep moving that forward, especially given the amount that we've invested in that particular area. So perhaps officers could revisit that particular area.
Sure, that can
Yeah,
be
we
achieved.
could do that.
We've met one of these already, haven't we, with the successful delivery of the Olympic torch.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
That's one that we've very successfully achieved.
Okay, are we happy with that? I'm happy with the update of the corporate plan. I look forward to seeing those satisfaction figures soared, and on that I'm pleased to propose the report.
Okay.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Are we all in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Item number 8, Lytham Hall Capital Grant Monitoring Report.
Thank you, Chair. This is on pages 38 to 46 of your agenda. In August 2011, a capital grant of £300,000 was given to Lytham Hall to support the Heritage Lottery Fund project and the restoration of the premises and the grounds. As a requirement of that grant, progress has to be reported to Cabinet, which includes making available the financial records. The accountants have received a copy of the financial records since the production of this report, so I can confirm that our accountants have checked those. This is the first report since the grant was awarded. Appendix 1 is a commentary from John Miller, who is the Chief Executive of Lytham Hall at the Trust, and he has set out the format of that against the heads of terms that were agreed. John has also extended an invite to Cabinet and any other elected members that would like to attend to a tour and a presentation of Lytham Hall to evidence firsthand the project and the valuable contribution that the grant has made. We are confident that the grant is being spent in accordance with the heads of terms based on the information that's been presented at this progress report. The recommendations are that Cabinet note the capital grant awarded to Lytham Hall is being spent in accordance with the heads of terms as at April 1st, 2012 on the restoration project, and the required monitoring information has been made available. The Cabinet receive a further capital monitoring report at the end of the current financial year, 2012-13, to ensure that the grant is continued to be spent in accordance with the heads of terms, and to confirm that the restoration project remains on target. And finally, I would recommend that the Cabinet take up the offer of a tour and presentation of the Hall as part of the monitoring process, and the invitation is extended to any other elected members who wish to attend.
Any observations, colleagues?
No. To propose it, Chairman.
Moved by Councillor Buckley,
I'm very happy to second it.
seconded by Councillor Little. Are we all in favour? Thank you. Item number 9 is the High Street Innovation Fund.
Yeah.
And on item 9 we have 3 questions, 2 from Councillor Oates and 1 from Councillor Silverwood. Would you like to present those questions now, please?
Who
Good
do you want
evening.
first?
By all means.
Right. Given that the Innovation Fund has only been given to areas which applied for the Porters Pilot competition, and given that the only area which entered this competition was Kirkham, whose entry was submitted by the Kirkham Business Group with little, if any, help from the Borough Council, does the Cabinet agree that this money should be given to Kirkham in order that it may be used to support and enhance the economic prosperity of the town centre?
Well, just for some background, the High Street Innovation Grant was allocated using business rate data, which is submitted by all authorities each year. And to those authorities affected by the riots and where the total of crimes exceeded 150, filed had a total at the time of 476 empty businesses, which equates to a total of 18.2%. And the High Street Innovation Grant is part of a package of measures announced by the government in response to the Mary Porter's review. The award of the grant is not linked in any way to towns that submitted the Porter's pilot bids. The grant was announced 24 hours before the deadline for the submission of the Porter's pilot bids.
Can I come back on that?
Yes.
Because the MP, Mark Menzies, has been very involved in the Kirkham submission, and it was the information given to us from Mark Menzies, who had spoken to Grant Shapps, who was told by Grant Shapps that it had been given to all the areas that had applied to the Porter's pilot, and that was the grounds on which the money was given. Now, we were given that information from our MP, and I think it's true to say that if Kirkham had not submitted that application, we probably would not have got that money. And if you have a look and see who has got the money, I think you'll find that it was given to areas that supplied for the Porters funding.
That is only the information that I've also been told, Councillor Rose.
Well, the information I've been told by the MP is that I've just given you.
If I can just come in on that as well, one of the associations that I'm a member of, the Booksellers Association, they lobby Westminster with regard to high streets and trying to support them. And that also, the same information came back to me, that all the monies that were allocated for the towns and cities that were subjected to the rioting, not all the money was used, and they were on a deadline rather than the department to lose it. So they actually, it was given specifically, as Councillor Rose has said, to those towns and those borough councils that submitted a false application. And that has been, I've had that advice from both Mark Menzies and the Booksellers Association.
I just need to just challenge that, because there seems to be quite a difference of opinion here. How can that be the case if the grant was made to the councils, local authorities, a day before the submissions of the Porter's bid were going in? That cannot be the case, that that you link it directly, if that is accurate information, that the grant to this authority was made 24 hours before the submission, the deadline.
Before the deadline of submission.
Can I say that, obviously I haven't got that information before me. I believed that the submissions were in, and then we found out after the submissions had gone in which areas got the grants. That's my remembrance, but obviously I haven't got the information before me, so I can't be adamant about that. But I seem to remember that we were advised about that funding after the submissions had gone in, and whilst we were waiting to hear who had been successful. So I think that bears some
And
checking.
also, because I was very close to the submission, just to explain that most of those people making submissions attended workshops that were put on by the Department of Local Communities, or whatever the department is. So therefore they were already privy, because when I attended one in Bolton, they already knew that there were going to be just over 370 submissions, and that was a month before the deadline. So they were certainly privy to all that information before the actual deadline as to who was submitting.
It's just the information, and it's not the information that we have with regards to the grant. And the information we have is that the grant was announced some 24 hours before the deadline of the submissions of those.
But therefore, based on the information we've just given to you,
Yes.
as I was personally involved in it, and therefore I know all the intricacies behind the scenes,
Yes.
the department was certainly well aware of who was making those submissions before the deadline.
I will bear that in mind, certainly. Did you want to say something, Councillor Fowler?
No, Councillor Buckley actually said what I was going to say. I cannot understand how somebody can claim credit for something when it was actually awarded the day before.
Well, perhaps now I've advised you of it, because I
Well, no,
spent many days on this. So
In
perhaps
fairness, Councillor Silverwood, I fully understand where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, we've all worked in government workshops, and we all know what goes on behind. But until a date comes up when something is awarded, nobody knows. We might be a nod and a wink that you might be getting it. It's happened before, but there's no guarantees. So to tie yourself to saying, well, it is ours because of, it's gone.
I don't think anybody's made that claim. All we've said is, because we applied for it. No, it didn't. It didn't.
Councillor Rhodes, we bear that in mind, and we bear
Okay.
in mind the observations that you've made. Would you like to move to your second?
Yeah. As the County Council is finally about to start work on phase 1 of improvements to Kirkham's footpaths and forecourts on the main street, a long overdue initiative and the first for 20 years in our town, would the Cabinet agree to contribute this innovation fund to this initiative to enable a greater area of the town to be improved in the first year? I'm sure that the Cabinet would like to be able to point to a positive outcome in using this fund and town centre enhancement to support economic prosperity in Kirkham would be a very tangible way of showing residents and the government that the fund has had a positive impact on our town centre. I know that our MP also supports this use of the fund, and there is an article in the Gazette tonight actually stating that he does support the town centre for all of this money.
Thank you. Well, again, I welcome the fact that Lancashire County Council have been able to identify funding to commence the work of carrying out those improvements in Kirkham. The High Street Innovation Fund can be used for any reason, including environmental improvements, as set out in the report. And the Cabinet is meeting tonight, this evening, to consider this option, along with a range of other options, before deciding on a preferred option that delivers the best possible outcome for all High Street communities across the Fylde Borough. But obviously we'll bear in mind the observations that you've made.
So can I ask, you're going to meet after this meeting to make a decision? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, pardon?
The recommendation on the audit basis states that the Cabinet this evening will make a decision on the option.
During the Cabinet meeting that we can all listen to? Yeah, okay, thank you. I just thought,
Yes.
yeah. And can I just say that...
No, if I didn't make it clear, if
that's
it
why I'm
sounded as though
asking.
it was at a subsequent
Yeah,
date,
that's what I'm asking.
it will be done tonight.
Because, as you're aware, Councillor Eaves, £40,000 of county money is going on the promenade which the county doesn't own. And of course, obviously, that 40,000 would be very useful in Kirkham. So we're not getting that. So anything from this fund would be very helpful to help with our town centre.
Thank you.
Okay?
Councillor Silverman.
Thank you. Given the fact that a huge amount of money has already been spent on Lytham, St Anne's and Ansdell because of the Open, 200,000 in the last budget for Ansdell's parade of shops, and the millions already spent on St Anne's, would you not agree that it is morally right that the £100,000 that the council has recently received from the government should be given to Kirkham to support its high street?
And the council has the council's agreed regeneration framework, and does identify significant and continued regeneration need in Kirkham. Capital investment decisions should be taken in line with our capital strategy, and will be considered by Cabinet at the appropriate time. Many of the projects delivered across the borough to date, and particularly in relation to the open golf, are environmental improvement projects, which is an option included in the report for consideration. The Cabinet will also be taking into account how to achieve the maximum benefit to high streets across the borough when considering these options. So we will be considering all those options, all the options within the report, in order to come to a decision tonight in order to move away forward.
Can I just come back to something? To try and put something into perspective, really, to come back on the question that I asked. I mean, bearing in mind we all know the advantages of the Open, but bearing in mind it's a 4-day event, and just looking at the filed newspaper that came through everybody's doors 2 or 3 days ago, it's very easy to put these figures from that. And St Anne's, for example, £200,000 on Wood Street for pavements, forecourts and street furniture. £143,000 on Orchard Road for landscaping, carriageway improvements and new street furniture. This is all based in for the Open. It specifically is under the heading of the Open. Ansdell and Fairhaven Station, £20,000. Lytham Station and improved paths, but there's no figures available for that. Fairhaven Lake, 7 bubbles for 3 weeks, £7,500. Do you call that an environmental project?
Free.
Pardon?
That's free because we don't pay.
Well, it's taxpayers' money that has paid the £7,500. Ansdell's parade of shops, £200,000 in the last budget. Lytham Hall, £300,000. I know those aren't the Open, but all I'm trying to do is, as I said in the question, what is morally right, and how far behind Kirkham is from everywhere else. And also, Kirkham and the Rural Files are having a tremendous number of visitors from the Gulf staying. Kirkham Grammar School, the farmers over on trails, but we haven't had any investment in Kirkham or the Rural File to smarten up, I think the quote in the newspaper says, to smarten either our station or our high street, because we rely on community groups doing our projects.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, councillors, and we will move on. Thank you. Councillor Fiddler.
Thank you, Leader. I think we all appreciate that over the years, Kirkham, which is an extremely important market town, hasn't had the same investment as St Anne's, for obvious reasons, and perhaps Lytham. So what I would like to do, with the Cabinet's permission, is to briefly summarise some of the salient points which I feel is very important in coming to the published recommendations on this item on the agenda. And I have to start, and I know we're not going to resolve this issue, but I think it is pertinent, it's certainly pertinent to me, that on March the 29th was the day that the government announced that Barbary Council would receive its £100,000 grant from the High Street Innovation. And although the decision to create this fund was influenced by the Porter's review, it was not, according to the information that I have, it was not related to the Porter's pilot competition, which again, as we've heard this evening, we already knew that Kirkham was unfortunately not being successful. But I think we can all agree that the overriding aim of the fund is primarily to reinvigorate our high streets. In this context, we've already, through the Policy Development Scrutiny Committee, recently looked at the history of the Council's support for our own town centre economy. But historically, Powell's policy for town centre regeneration has been based in the main on public realm improvements. But scrutiny went far beyond that, and they made a series of recommendations far broader than what we historically have just stated in terms of public realm improvements. And a sentiment of the Scrutiny Committee's deliberations are represented by the bullet points on page 50 of the agenda report. But however, I turn to a very salient point, which I believe to be very important, is that the spirit of the High Street Innovation Fund, and this is emphasised in the Department for Communities and Local Government's accompanying letter, suggests that the emphasis should be on new and creative ways to enhance the viability and vitality of our town centres. Now, that's not my words, it's within the context of the accompanying letter, and they are looking, the government is looking that this fund is used on new and creative ways to enhance the viability and vitality. So with this in mind, it is the Cabinet's decision that we depart from our usual public realm improvement policy, and that the preferred choice be the business support option, and this is the bullet point 3 on page 50. In doing so, this would allow all three of our town centres to benefit from the fund. The business support option is within the spirit of the fund, and for Powell is a novel innovation, total departure from the historic way that we've always concentrated on public realm improvements. So I then turn to the recommendations on page 47, and I want to put to committee, to Cabinet, that the Cabinet, as listed there, I don't need to read them, but in recommendation 2, it is the Cabinet's decision that the business support option is the preferred option, and that's where the fund ought to be applied. When it comes to recommendation 3, where the officer will go away to look at the final agreement and implementation of the business strategy, I think we have to make sure, and perhaps we have an addendum, that we do need a monitoring framework, or something of this, what could be seen to be a rather subjective, diffuse way of dealing with. We need to have close monitoring of how and progress of that particular scheme.
Other observations?
Yeah.
Councillor Fowler?
I totally agree actually with what Councillor Pickering said. One of the problems in the high street nowadays is businesses starting and then failing. And any support that can be given to any business to help it establish itself is a good thing, because I think that in the long run, the help and advice that they can get is probably not something they would go and particularly look for. But if it's made available for them, it will prevent some of the business failures that we do get. And that's one of the problems in any high street, not just in our area, but any other area. As businesses start and unfortunately fail.
Councillor Buckley?
I think when you look at the underlying reason for awarding the grant, the response is fair, because it's looking at the number of empty businesses which are going to be scattered right across the Fylde and not just in one area. Therefore, to provide business support doesn't mean from one area against another. and allows people to come forward from all our town centres and beyond that as well. So I think it's a fair response which meets the criteria for the grant.
Thank you.
I think it's also fair that through the organisation that Councillor Silverwood is involved in, business group, that she encourages her members to take up whatever help and advice they can get via this place.
Any other observations?
Yeah, a bit of the debate didn't take place today instead of on Monday evening behind closed doors, as usual in this cabinet. You're a disgrace.
Pardon? Thank you. We will continue. Thank you. To continue, do we want to say anything else, Councillor Fiddler?
I don't think I need to.
Thank you. And you propose the item 9?
I do.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Pounder. Thank you. I'd like also to add to the to Councillor Fiddler's comments that I would insist that there will be a close monitoring exercise taking place with regards to when this commences, in order to look to the progress of and successes of this, in order that anything that goes untowards with it, we might be able to revisit and address.
Yeah, we've got that.
Thank you.
On reflection, do you think it's something I said that's caused that as well?
I think we move on to the next item.
We'll move on. Item 10 is the Internal Audit Shared Service. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, Cabinet.
Good evening, Ms Morrison.
This report, Chairman, is brought to seek your in-principle approval this evening for a proposal for the Council to enter into a shared service arrangement with Blackpool Council in relation to the Internal Audit Service. This would be subject to the satisfactory conclusion of negotiations that are ongoing between the two councils. Just to provide a little background information, in January of this year, as part of the Council's corporate restructure review, internal audit was identified as a service area that could contribute to savings targets. And in response to that, a potential partnership opportunity was identified with Blackpool Council to develop a shared internal audit service. It is worth pointing out that as well as realising cost benefits, the other benefits that I perceive that would be gained in entering into such an arrangement would be increased resilience across the two councils, as both councils, and in particular this council, has relatively small internal audit teams, and this would combine the two teams into a larger team that would be managed by one individual. To point out on the bottom of page 58 and 59, there are some underlying principles regarding the shared service, and one of the key ones that I would like to draw to the attention of Cabinet is that each respective council would retain its own audit committee. It would just be the back office resources that support the audit committee that would be combined. A similar report did go before the Audit Committee last week, and they were invited to make any observations to the Cabinet as part of your considerations this evening. They were content for the discussions to proceed and were content to commend you to agree in principle support this evening. However, that was on the subject that the negotiations were brought to a satisfactory conclusion regarding cost reductions, and those discussions will be ongoing with Blackpool. So that's a brief summary of the report, Chairman, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Buckley?
When do we think that this will come back for a decision to be made? We're looking at making it in principle today, but obviously the details need to be thrashed out. When do you think we'll have that further information to move forward?
It's anticipated that further reports would go back before audit and this committee in September. It is in the forward plan for Cabinet. In bringing any negotiations to conclusion, we would like to go back to the audit committee to keep them informed as parent committee of the service in many respects, and we would bring a more detailed report back to you in the autumn.
Okay, thank you very much. Happy to propose the recommendation.
Proposed by Councillor Buckley. Seconded by Councillor Founder. We all in favour? Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the report.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Cabinet.